Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to the Institute for Personal Development, Kriya Yoga Ashram, where total consciousness is the new frontier.
Kriya Yoga is union of the individual with the divine. Join us as we explore the practices to initiate this process.
Good morning. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. Let's talk consciousness. I am your hostess, Lisa Winton, and with me is Kenny Choi, also known as Swami Jayananda, founder of the Institute for Personal Development, located here in Hampton, New Hampshire. Good morning, Swami. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing pretty good today. How about you?
Well, I'm doing great today, too. Thanks for asking. And we'd like to thank you all for tuning in. Today on The Voice of Yoga, we will talk about the upcoming year of 2023 as a great time for a new beginning with the belief in the divine creation as the truth of all being. Listen as we explore the biblical statement from Matthew 5:48. Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect. In this show, we will discuss the Sanskrit term Purna, translated as perfect and meaning whole and complete. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. We are talking consciousness. Join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul and be perfect as your Father. Swami, today's title of the show is Practicing the Principle of Perfection 2023. What would you like us to know about this title?
Well, we want to really explore and try and understand what is the principle of perfection. For me, it's the divine principle, which is the law of one power, one perfect being, looking at itself, as itself, of itself, and to itself, one without opposite or division. This is what is meant by whole, and the origins of the word heal means to be whole.
Swami, so you said the divine principle is a law of one power. So help us to understand this a little bit more. We want to make sure that we see oneness all the time. We can't be in two-ness. There can't be a me and a you, or light and dark. Is that how we should be looking at that?
Once you start to understand the belief in two powers drives the false sense of existence. The law of karma is all based on that belief in two powers. And the important thing here is to understand it is a belief. It's not a law. That spirit is the only self-existent power in the universe. And that's why in the Bible where John says, anything that was made by him, and anything that was not made by him was not made. This mental material concept of life that we're calling life was not made by the divine creative principle. Therefore, it's not backed by divine law. The way that we start to practice employing divine law is by stop believing in what isn't under the jurisdiction of its government. Yeah, this is the fall from Eden in the Bible, the idea of not eating from the fruit of the tree of life and now going to the tree of good and evil, of the knowledge and good and evil. This was duality, and as long as we draw from duality, we have this belief in two powers. But remember, it's just a belief. It doesn't have the power of the creative principle behind it.
I know we've talked a lot in the past in other shows about in the Bible where it says not to sow to the flesh, but sow to the spirit. Is that what we're talking about? That kind of duality as well?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Initially, it seems like rules for conduct because we're working with this mind that is creating this false sense of existence. And so in the framework of that belief in two powers, we polarize and we want the good. and we're trying to get rid of the bad. Only that's the trap. And what you find is with human thought and with belief, you can change finite bad to finite good. But you can't have finite good without finite bad. And this is the cycle of death and rebirth. And in order for us to find liberation from this ever-ending, never-ending plight that we're all in, because we also want to be whole. There's an innate drive in every human being that we want to be whole, we want to be complete. But what we find is completion can't happen in duality. It can't happen in the physical form. It can't happen in the astral mental form. The only place we can find completion is in spiritual identity. But now what we have to figure out is, what does it look like when I'm doing it? And then how do you practice being one with this infinite spiritual absolute goodness?
So when that happens, Swami, that's when we become whole, and hence that we would have a healing from that point?
Yeah, all healing is just the revealing of the divine creation. We come out of the belief in the false sense of existence, which is under the government of two powers, under the law of karma. It's material law. What you put out is what you get back. For every action, there is an equal and an opposite reaction. Now, spiritual law is the law of one. And I have something here from a paper that Mary Baker Eddy wrote in 1910, and I'll read it. It is the healer's understanding of the operation of the divine principle and his application thereof which heals the sick, just as it is one's understanding of the principle of mathematics which enables him to demonstrate its rules. End of quote.
The quote you just read there by Mary Baker Eddy reminds me of what Jesus demonstrated when he asked the crippled man, "Art thou willing to be whole?" And I think he demonstrated this principle that we're talking about.
Exactly. That's what we said. I mean, all healing is the revealing of this divine truth. We're not fixing a physical body. In reality, you'll find there are no physical beings. The only reality is spirit. And just like Jesus asking that crippled man, "Art thou willing to be whole?" we have to ask ourselves the same question. Because are we willing to give up this personal sense of self in order for us to gain this greater understanding of life as being perfect, whole, and complete? And as you begin to educate your thought up to this, as we've been saying, you will never be able to perceive the divine creation with the mind you are using to get you through this lifetime. You will eventually have to begin to think differently. But we do understand that it is a process. Initially, we start out with belief. Belief puts you on a level playing field. You believe you were born in a physical body. Now what you have to start to believe is God did not create imperfection. The divine creation does not have two powers. There's only one divine creative principle, and it's absolute goodness. That gives you a principle. If you can be faithful and loyal to that principle, it will begin to reveal itself, because consciousness is experience. If we have truth in consciousness, it must externalize as divine quality. And that's why we use Christian Science so much, because Mary Baker Eddy gave us an outcome, and a rule. It's not something that you believe in anymore. You develop your belief into what she called faith. Faith is where your belief now begins to demonstrate. You now start to reveal the truth in your external experiences. As you begin to cultivate this capability, your faith will then graduate to understanding, to the degree where you should be able to demonstrate divine truth with scientific certainty. But you can't do this with human will. You can't do this by thinking about the divine truth. You must know the truth, and you must know it in the way that you are known by the divine creation, which means you must accept spiritual identity. In oneness, there's only one life. And if this concept of God, if there's only one God, we can all accept that there's only one God, but there's many of us. Well, that's not going to get you demonstration. You must understand that there's only one being. And if this perfect divine spirit of truth is the only being, who are you? Who am I? And then we need this willingness to put off the belief in the false sense of self, because we must be pure of heart. There can't be any doubt or confusion about whether what you're doing, what you're giving up is going to be to your advantage. You must know the truth. The only thing that is here is absolute goodness. And you will have to develop that understanding. But we start by educating our thought up to this idea of oneness. And then with the toe in the water, we start to rely on this invisible, intangible, omnipresent, all-powerful principle, the only power in the universe.
I think that most of us have this willingness to accept this concept of oneness. However, I can see the challenge because in our appearances, we are surrounded by duality, light and dark, good and bad, bad weather, good weather that we see every day. If we see something that shows us duality, how do we get past that appearance?
Well, again, you start to use the testimony of your material senses as the check engine light on the dashboard of consciousness. You no longer take that as this is my reality. You start to understand what is appearing in your material senses is just a thought about what's really here. Initially, we think, well, I see that, but what you see with your material senses isn't there. And if you need a little confirmation on that, you can turn to modern physics today, and they will tell you when Einstein was on the planet, people thought when you weren't looking at things, they were there. But now science is saying that's not right. What we're calling real is observation dependent, and it is the observer that sets the measurement for the collapse of the wave function. So in other words, nothing is there until someone makes a measurement. And we will perceive whatever it is we think we're going to perceive. And the unfortunate thing about this dynamic is most of us are perceiving world thought, which is being broadcasted and televised and accepted as my thought. And so we're hypnotized. We're in this belief thought loop. And in order to get out of it, we have to challenge it. And here, when you start to practice, you're going to learn practice makes perfect only when practice is perfect.
We're going to pause right here to hear a word from our sponsor. So listeners, we'll be back with you in just a few moments. Kriya Yoga Asana class is a module fitting into the master plan, leading the practitioner to the experience of total consciousness by attuning the mind-body complex to the divine idea. A system of exercises designed to use the physical appearance to determine individual level of consciousness and degree of awareness, starting with the process of lengthening and strengthening muscles to bring bones into the position of internal support. We educate thought up to spiritual apprehension, because when spirit is cause, it calls into expression the beauty of holiness, making creation perfect. Mountain pose may not bring you truth in consciousness, but truth in consciousness must bring mountain pose. Visit the website www.ipdtransform.com. Namaste. Welcome back. For those of you just joining us, you're listening to The Voice of Yoga, and we are talking consciousness. So I'd like to spend some more time talking about the challenges of overcoming the pull of this world mind or collective consciousness. Can we talk more about the practices that we could be employing?
Yeah, the idea initially of separating. You come in with this belief you are a finite mortal being and we're hypnotized. The idea here is, I like the term Mary Baker Eddy used, animal magnetism. The playing field is really tipped in favor of us staying in this mortal sense of self, because fear is the defense mechanism for it. Instinct, appetite, preservation, survival. Those are really very strong influences on human consciousness. And so we have to develop a certain degree of willpower in order to be able to overcome that pull. And it reminds me a little bit of when I was in the building trades, we worked a lot with what was called stainless steel. And the difference between carbon steel and stainless steel was noticeable when you had a magnet. The carbon steel was magnetic. So when we incarnate, we're like carbon steel. And the pull is very strong to the magnet. What they did in industry was they refined steel and they took the carbon out of it. That's basically what we try and do with our practices in Kriya Yoga. We refine the mind-body complex by distilling, purifying, and perfecting ourselves physically and mentally. And you take that magnetic carbon steel and you refine it into a non-magnetic stainless steel. That enables you to separate from the influence of the world mind. Now, of course, you might be able to do that if you had someone like Jesus who could spiritually circumcise you, literally cut you from the influence of this universal belief. But if you don't have that, and you're trying to do this with bootstraps, you're going to have to employ some strategies. And what we do in yoga is we understand that practice makes perfect only when practice is perfect. Bad habits set up limitations, and it doesn't matter what you do, whether you are involved in athletics, if you play a musical instrument, in business. If we have bad habits, they set up limitations that don't enable us to advance until we correct them. Living is the same thing. If we have bad living habits, if we don't think right, if we don't breathe right, if we're not hydrated, if we don't eat right, eating right is eliminating all of the foods that produce cravings and disturbances for themselves. And then the idea of exercise. Working with your physical body, like in the commercial where it says, Mountain pose may not bring you truth and consciousness, but truth and consciousness must bring mountain pose. See, when you identify with yourself spiritually, consciousness is experience. When spirit is cause, creation is perfect. So, on some level, if you could know the truth of yourself, then you would outpicture perfect physical appearance. But as we are working with educating ourselves up to this, then you use the testimony of your senses as the check engine light on the dashboard of consciousness. So if you find pain, discomfort, instability, lack, or limitation in your physical form, rather than trying to fix this mental concept that's on a mat, you actually stop trying, striving, struggling, planning, seeking, or even asking. You must affirm the truth. You must know the truth. Life is perfect. That you are made in the image and likeness of an indestructible, perfect principle. And then as your thoughts become less and less influenced by this world thought, which is telling you that you're going to die, that you are blind, crippled, crazy, that you are susceptible to disease, everything that we're socialized to believe. And that world thought is very powerful. But the Bible tells you that with God, all things are possible.
So it seems to me that we would have to have this awareness when we fall for the trap of believing in any type of duality. And I'm even talking about the there of space and the here of space and time. We talked about that many times in other shows. So let's talk about what happens if maybe we have a confrontation with another person. How do we go about spiritualizing an experience like that?
Yeah, well, I kind of like what Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, the idea of if somebody compels you to go with them a mile, go with them twain. Now, he's not telling us to go 2 miles if they compel you 1. To go twain means you must begin to convert everything back to spirit. Come out of the belief in the opposition, the belief in the many. And again, I mean, this isn't something that you're going to be able to do right out of the blocks. You are going to have to educate your thought up to this. Because I love what Mary Baker Eddy said in, I think it's Miscellaneous Writings, for Jesus to walk on water is science. But until poor humanity can walk the water, for them to step out onto the Atlantic isn't wisdom or science. You're not trying to set yourself up here. And at the same time, spiritual understanding isn't a martial art. It is a realization that there is no opposition. And like I say, I mean, we can think about this and we can talk about this, but until we are conscious of it, we walk defenselessly among these non-existent powers that can seemingly kill you.
So we really have to really look at what is around us and really pay attention to what it is that we are seeing and hearing and whatever else the world mind is throwing at us.
Right. And the idea isn't to negate it. We don't just want to deny the testimony of our senses. We must accept it for what it is. We know that it isn't real. If God did not make it, it is not made. And God did not make discord lack, limitation, sickness, suffering, disease. So you treat it differently. And you start, like you say, you selectively edit what it is that you're letting in. All the good, beautiful, and true attributes belong to the divine creative principle. But what's appearing in your material senses is never real. It's just a thought about it. And so you keep your fidelity to what is real, the invisible, intangible, changeless state of being. And after a while, when you start to activate your spiritual senses, when you're no longer thinking with your mind, but you're thinking with your soul, and you're working in a completely different medium. The mind works in duality and contrast. It's rational. But the soul works in the absolute. And it understands, just like what you said, it is beyond time and space. It is beyond concept and form, beyond belief and matter. It's beyond thinking and change. It's beyond this state of hypnotism, animal magnetism, and human will. And in this spiritual identity, there's no personal sense. It's just pure, unadulterated, perfect consciousness.
So this spiritual practice, we got to make sure that we don't do this mentally. We don't do this with personal will. We have to really look at our surroundings and look at what's coming at us and say, how can I make this into oneness and not two-ness?
Well, coming back to what you're saying, you really have to start physically and you have to start mentally. The idea of the Martha Wilcox lesson, to be faithful and orderly with the objects of sense, makes us receptive to the deeper things of the divine creative principle. And that's why I really like the Kriya Yoga, because we work with these practices, skillful use of thought, skillful use of breath, skillful use of water, skillful use of food, skillful use of exercise. And with the goal in mind, total consciousness is my outcome.
Swami, how would you best summarize the idea of divine principle?
Well, for me, spiritual practice is not like anything we do mentally or materially, which is primarily with personal will and personal sense. The idea of divine principle must be understood, and it is very easy to think you know truth, but don't. And I have something here from Mary Baker Eddy. I'll read it. But thought, loosened from a material basis, but not yet instructed by science, may become wild with freedom, and so be self-contradictory. End of quote. And even say, for example, we practice things like mantra, an exercise in concentration, where we chant something 108 times every Sunday, the Isha Upanishad. And it translates, that is perfect, this is perfect. Out of that perfection emanates this perfection. In the ocean of perfection surges the waves of perfection, yet perfection is never lost. And after a while, you will start to see that everything you're doing is about keeping your mind in constant relation with the divine idea, the perfection of being.
Well, we're going to close down our show for today, so listeners, be sure to visit the website www.ipdtransform.com. On the homepage, when you see the Fading Banner Blog Talk Radio, click it, directs you to its catalog page. Click on the Products tab, then Online Classes directs you to all the classes that Swami has available. Swami, any final thoughts about today's program?
Well, I would like to encourage people to join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance, get the light in your soul, and be perfect as your Father. Namaste.
Thank you for listening to our program, The Voice of Yoga. This is Lisa Winton along with Swami Jayananda signing off. Have a wonderful Kriya Yoga kind of day. Namaste.